The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Courtroom 7, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany benches. Outside, the world continued its ordinary rhythm, cars honking, people rushing to work, children laughing on their way to school. But inside this room, time seemed to stand still, waiting for a miracle that nobody believed would come. Judge Sarah Holloway sat at her bench, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the case file one more time. 30 years on the bench had hardened her to most tragedies, but this one was different. This one involved a 3-year-old girl who hadn't spoken a single word in 6 months, not to her foster parents, not to the child psychologists, not to the detectives who had tried everything from puppets to play therapy. The child had locked her trauma so deep inside that everyone feared the truth would never surface. The gallery filled slowly. Reporters clutched their notebooks, sensing this would be a case they'd remember forever. Social workers whispered among themselves, their faces etched with concern. The prosecuting attorney, Rachel Morrison, sat at her table reviewing her notes for the 100th time. She was known for her unshakable composure, but today her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her papers. How do you build a case on silence? How do you seek justice when your only witness has retreated into a world where words no longer exist? Across the aisle, the defense attorney James Elmore straightened his expensive tie, confidence radiating from every pore. He had built his career on creating reasonable doubt, and what created more doubt than a witness who couldn't or wouldn't speak? He had already prepared his closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen, a case built on drawings and assumptions is not justice. It's a witch hunt. The defendant sat beside him, his face carefully neutral. To the casual observer, he looked like any other businessman, clean-shaven, well-dressed, unremarkable. But Rachel had seen the crime scene photos. She had read the medical examiner's report. She knew what those ordinary-looking hands had done. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. All rise for the Honorable Judge Holloway. Everyone stood, but all eyes were on the door at the back of the courtroom. The door where, any moment now, a little girl named Lily would enter. A child who held the key to everything but had lost the ability to turn the lock. The door creaked open. Lily appeared, and the collective breath of the courtroom caught. She was so small. Her blonde hair had been carefully braided by her foster mother, and she wore a simple pink dress with white flowers. But it was her eyes that struck everyone, huge, haunted eyes that had seen things no child should ever witness. Eyes that had watched the unthinkable and then shut down completely, taking her voice with them. Her foster mother, Margaret Chen, held her hand gently. Margaret had spent countless nights rocking this child through nightmares, wiping away silent tears, trying to convince her that the world could be safe again. But Lily remained locked in her silence, trapped in that terrible night 6 months ago when everything changed. They took 3 steps into the courtroom and Lily froze. Her tiny body went rigid. The towering wooden benches seemed to close in on her like the walls of a prison. The judge's bench loomed impossibly high, like a mountain she could never climb. Strange faces stared at her from every direction, some sympathetic, some curious, some coldly analytical. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too harsh. Everything was too much. Her grip on Margaret's hand tightened until her knuckles turned white. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. Margaret bent down, whispering reassurances, but Lily's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal seeking escape. This wasn't going to work. Everyone in the courtroom could see it. This traumatized child was about to bolt, and with her would go any chance of justice. Rachel half rose from her chair, panic fluttering in her chest. They had backup plans, recorded interviews, expert testimony, physical evidence, but none of it would carry the weight of Lily's own words, except Lily had no words left to give. Then, cutting through the tension like a knife through butter, came a sound that changed everything. Click, click, click. The soft, rhythmic sound of nails on marble flooring. Every head turned toward the side entrance. The door swung open, and Shadow entered the courtroom. He was magnificent, a large German shepherd with a thick coat of black and tan fur, moving with the graceful confidence of a creature who knew exactly who he was and what he was meant to do. His brown eyes, intelligent and kind, scanned the room with calm assessment. Around his chest, he wore a blue vest clearly marked, "Therapy Dog Do Not Distract." Beside him walked his handler, Officer Janet Wright, but she was merely Shadow's companion. Everyone understood immediately that this dog was the one in charge. The courtroom, which had been holding its breath in anxiety, now exhaled in wonder. Several jury members leaned forward in their seats. Even Judge Holloway removed her glasses, watching with undisguised curiosity. But the most dramatic change was in Lily. Her rigid posture softened, her panicked breathing slowed. Her enormous eyes, which had been darting everywhere in fear, locked onto Shadow and stayed there. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she looked like a child instead of a frightened ghost. Shadow sat perfectly still on the rug positioned just in front of the witness chair, his head tilted slightly to one side in what almost looked like an invitation. His tail gave one gentle thump against the floor. Without a word, because words were still beyond her reach, Lily released her foster mother's hand. On legs that had been trembling moments before, she walked across the courtroom toward the dog. Margaret started to follow, but Rachel held up a hand, stopping her. This was Lily's moment. The little girl reached Shadow and dropped to her knees beside him. She buried her small face into his thick fur, her arms wrapping around his neck. Shadow didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't pull away. He simply sat, solid and steady, like an anchor in a storm. And in that moment, every single person in Courtroom 7 understood that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The courtroom remained frozen in a tableau of suspended animation. No one dared move. No one dared breathe too loudly. The only sound was the gentle tick of the wall clock and the soft rustle of Lily's dress as she nestled deeper into Shadow's fur. Rachel Morrison slowly lowered herself back into her chair, her heart pounding. In all her years as a prosecutor, she had handled hundreds of cases involving children. She had learned to read their body language, to understand their fears, to coax testimony from reluctant witnesses. But she had never seen anything quite like this. The transformation in Lily was instantaneous and profound. The terrified child who had frozen at the courtroom entrance was now kneeling peacefully beside a dog she had met only seconds ago. Officer Janet Wright, Shadow's handler, stood quietly near the witness stand. Her hand rested on the small pouch at her belt containing Shadow's treats and toys, though she knew she wouldn't need them. Shadow was working now, doing what he had been trained to do since he was a puppy. Janet had seen him comfort dozens of trauma victims, children who had witnessed violence, adults struggling with PTSD, families shattered by tragedy. But even she was moved by the immediate connection forming between this silent child and her gentle giant of a dog. Shadow's training had been extensive and rigorous. For 2 years, he had been carefully socialized, exposed to every possible environment and situation. He had learned to remain calm during shouting, to stay still when people cried, to offer comfort without being intrusive. He had been taught to read human emotions with an almost supernatural precision. And right now, every fiber of his being was focused on the small girl clinging to him like he was her lifeline. Because, in a very real sense, he was. Judge Holloway leaned forward slightly, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. She had presided over countless difficult cases, but she had never allowed a therapy dog in her courtroom before. When Rachel had filed the motion 3 weeks ago, the judge had been skeptical. Would the dog be a distraction? Would it create unfair sympathy for the prosecution? Would the defense claim it prejudiced the jury? She had researched extensively, reading case law from other states, consulting with child psychologists, and ultimately deciding that if this dog could help Lily testify, then justice demanded she allow it. Now, watching the scene unfold before her, Judge Holloway knew she had made the right decision. Lily's foster mother, Margaret, stood where Rachel had stopped her, tears streaming silently down her face. For 6 months she had tried everything to reach this child. She had created a safe, loving home. She had eliminated anything that might trigger Lily's memories. She had hired the best therapists, bought every recommended book, attended support groups for foster parents of traumatized children. And yet, despite all her love and effort, Lily had remained locked away, unreachable. Until now, until Shadow. Margaret watched as Lily's small hand stroked Shadow's fur with a gentleness that broke her heart. This was the same child who had flinched at every sudden movement, who woke screaming from nightmares she couldn't articulate, who had stopped playing, stopped laughing, stopped being a child. But here, with this dog, something was shifting. Some door that had been bolted shut was beginning to crack open. In the jury box, 12 men and women sat transfixed. They had been selected for their impartiality, their ability to weigh evidence objectively. But they were also human beings, and what they were witnessing transcended legal procedure. This was a moment of pure, raw humanity, a traumatized child finding solace in the unconditional acceptance of an animal. Juror number 7, a grandmother of 3, discreetly wiped her eyes. Juror number 2, a high school teacher who worked with troubled teens, found himself gripping the armrest of his chair. They all understood, without anyone saying a word, that they were about to hear testimony that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The defense attorney, James Elmore, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His carefully constructed strategy was already crumbling. He had planned to argue that a nonverbal child couldn't provide reliable testimony, that any evidence derived from her would be too ambiguous to convict. But the jury was watching Lily with rapt attention, their sympathy clearly engaged. The dog had changed the entire dynamic of the courtroom in less than 5 minutes. Still, Elmore was a professional. He would adapt. He would wait for his moment. But even he felt a twinge of something uncomfortable. Perhaps it was conscience, as he watched the small child seek comfort from the therapy dog. He pushed the feeling aside. His job was to defend his client, not to judge him. Shadow, for his part, remained perfectly still. His breathing was slow and steady, his body a solid mass of warmth and security. He could feel Lily's heart rate beginning to slow, could sense her terror gradually subsiding. This was what he had been born to do, not to chase criminals or sniff out drugs or guard buildings, but to offer silent, steadfast comfort to those who needed it most. His brown eyes flickered briefly to Janet, a small check-in, and she gave him the slightest nod of approval. "Good boy, stay." Rachel knew this was her moment. She rose slowly, moving with deliberate gentleness toward Lily and Shadow. Every step was calculated not to startle, not to break the fragile peace that had settled over the child. She knelt down several feet away, lowering herself to Lily's level. "Lily," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "my name is Rachel. I'm here to help you." Lily didn't look up, but her fingers stilled in Shadow's fur. She was listening. "This is Shadow," Rachel continued, even though it was obvious Lily had already bonded with the dog. "He's here to be your friend. He's going to stay right beside you the whole time, okay?" A tiny nod, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Movement, response, connection. Rachel's pulse quickened. This was working. After months of silence, Lily was communicating, even if just through small gestures. "Shadow is very special," Rachel said, her voice warm and gentle. "Do you know what makes him so special?" Lily finally lifted her head from Shadow's fur. Her face was tear-streaked, her eyes still wide and frightened, but there was something else there now too, a spark of curiosity. "Shadow is a really good listener," Rachel explained. "The very best listener in the whole world, and he never judges. He just listens and loves." Lily looked down at Shadow, studying his face. The dog gazed back at her with those infinitely patient brown eyes. "Can you tell Shadow something?" Rachel asked carefully. "Anything at all. Shadow would love to hear your voice." The courtroom held its collective breath once more. And then, for the first time in 6 months, Lily spoke. Shadow, she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse, fragile as spun glass. I'm scared. 2 words, just 2 simple words. But they shattered the silence like thunder, and in that moment, everyone knew that justice had just become possible. The 2 words hung in the air like a prayer answered. Shadow, I'm scared. Lily's voice was so soft, so fragile that for a moment the people in the back rows weren't sure they had heard correctly. But the microphone system captured every syllable, and those delicate words echoed through the speakers, reaching every corner of Courtroom 7. Rachel Morrison felt her throat tighten with emotion, but she forced herself to remain calm and professional. This breakthrough was monumental, but it was also precarious. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and Lily might retreat back into her protective silence. Rachel had to guide this testimony with the precision of a surgeon and the gentleness of a mother. It's okay to be scared, Lily, Rachel said softly, still kneeling several feet away. Shadow understands. He's right here with you. Lily's small hand continued stroking Shadow's fur in rhythmic motions, back and forth, as if the repetitive movement helped her organize her chaotic thoughts. Shadow remained absolutely still, his presence solid and reassuring. His ears twitched occasionally, picking up every sound in the courtroom, but his focus never wavered from the little girl beside him. Shadow, Lily whispered again, her face pressed against the dog's neck. I don't like loud. Rachel nodded encouragingly, even though Lily wasn't looking at her. Shadow doesn't like loud either. He likes quiet, gentle voices, just like yours. Judge Holloway watched intently from her bench, her hand poised over her gavel but making no move to use it. She had silenced her courtroom with nothing more than her presence and the gravity of the moment. Even the court reporter typed with unusual softness, trying not to break the spell. Shadow, Lily's voice cracked slightly and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. He hurt Mommy. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the entire courtroom. Several people in the gallery gasped. Margaret Chen covered her mouth with both hands, her own tears flowing freely. The jury members leaned forward, their faces reflecting the horror and heartbreak of what they were hearing. Rachel's professional mask nearly cracked. She had read the case file. She knew what had happened to Lily's mother, but hearing it from this tiny child's lips, spoken to a therapy dog in a trembling whisper, made the tragedy unbearably real. Can you tell Shadow what you saw, Lily? Rachel asked gently. Shadow wants to understand what happened. Lily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting into Shadow's fur. The dog didn't protest or pull away. He simply sat, absorbing her fear and grief with infinite patience. I saw it, Lily finally whispered. Her voice was barely audible even with the microphone. Shadow, I saw everything. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time since the trial began, his carefully controlled expression flickered. James Elmore, his attorney, started to rise, perhaps to object, but something in Judge Holloway's sharp glance made him sink back down. Not now. Not yet. Rachel moved slightly closer, still being careful not to invade Lily's space. Where were you, Lily, when you saw it? The table broke, Lily said, her words coming faster now as if a dam had burst inside her. It made a big crash. So loud, Shadow, so loud. She began to tremble, her small body shaking with the force of the memories flooding back. Shadow, sensing her distress, shifted slightly and placed his large head on her lap, a gesture of comfort and protection. Lily immediately wrapped both arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur once more. You're safe now, Lily, Rachel reminded her softly. Shadow is keeping you safe. No one can hurt you here. Lily nodded against Shadow's fur, her breathing ragged. When she spoke again, her voice was muffled but clear enough for the microphone to catch. I was hiding, under my little table, the one with my crayons. Rachel felt her heart break. A child's art table, a place that should have been associated with creativity, and joy had become a hiding spot from horror. I was quiet, Lily continued, her voice taking on an edge of desperate pride, as if being quiet had been her most important accomplishment. I was so quiet, Shadow. You'd be proud of me, right? I didn't make any noise. Officer Janet Wright, standing beside the witness stand, felt her own eyes begin to burn with unshed tears. She had worked with Shadow for 5 years, had seen him comfort countless victims, but this was different. This child wasn't just sharing what she had witnessed. She was seeking validation from a dog, needing to know that her survival instinct to hide and stay silent had been the right choice. Shadow, as if understanding exactly what Lily needed, gave a soft, gentle exhale, almost like a sigh of approval. It wasn't barking or whining, both of which would have been inappropriate in court. It was simply a sound of acknowledgement, of acceptance. Lily lifted her tear-stained face and looked directly into Shadow's brown eyes. He was shouting, she said, her voice stronger now. The bad man was shouting at Mommy. She was crying. She said words I'm not supposed to say. Rachel glanced at her notes, then back at Lily. What happened after the table broke, Lily? Mommy said run, Lily whispered, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. She said run, baby, run. But I couldn't, Shadow. My legs wouldn't work. They were like frozen, so I hid instead. I crawled under my table and I made myself really small. She demonstrated with her body, curling into herself as she relived the memory. Shadow moved with her, adjusting his position to maintain contact, to keep her anchored to the present moment. I put my hands over my ears, Lily continued, her voice breaking. But I could still hear. I heard Mommy screaming. I heard the bad noises. I heard when everything went quiet. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for the sound of Lily's testimony. Even the journalists had stopped taking notes, too transfixed by the raw truth pouring from this child's heart. Do you remember what happened next? Rachel asked, though she hated herself for having to push forward. Lily nodded slowly. I stayed under my table for a really long time. I counted to 100 twice. I can count really good, Shadow. Want to hear? The innocent question, so childlike in the midst of such horror, nearly destroyed Rachel's composure. You're very smart, Lily. What happened after you finished counting? It was quiet, Lily said, her voice distant now as if she were watching the memory from far away. So I peeked out just a little bit, and I saw. She stopped, her entire body going rigid. It's okay, Rachel encouraged gently. Shadow is right here, you're safe. Lily looked up, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, her gaze moved away from Shadow. Her eyes swept across the room, past the jury, past the judge, until they landed on the defendant. And when she spoke next, her voice was clear and firm, carrying a conviction that no 3-year-old should ever have to possess. I saw Mommy on the floor. She wasn't moving anymore, Shadow. She wasn't moving, and there was red everywhere, and he was standing there looking at his hands. She raised one small finger and pointed directly at the defendant. That man, the bad one, he made my Mommy stop moving. The courtroom erupted. Chaos exploded through Courtroom 7 like a bomb detonating. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Several people stood up, straining to see. A reporter dropped her notebook, the clatter echoing through the room. One of the jurors, an elderly woman in the back row, pressed her hand to her chest, her face pale with shock. The court stenographer's fingers flew across her machine, struggling to capture every word of the pandemonium. But at the center of it all, Lily remained perfectly still, her small finger pointed unwavering at the defendant, her other hand buried in Shadow's fur. The dog pressed closer to her, his body language shifting subtly from passive comfort to active protection. James Elmore shot to his feet so violently that his chair scraped against the floor with a screech that made several people wince. "Objection," he bellowed, his face flushed red. "Your Honor, this is completely improper. The witness has been led." "Sit down, Mr. Elmore," Judge Holloway commanded, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. She raised her gavel and brought it down once, a sharp crack that silenced the courtroom instantly. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." The gallery settled reluctantly, people sinking back into their seats but leaning forward with barely contained emotion. The judge's steely gaze swept across the room, daring anyone to speak out of turn. "Mr. Elmore," she continued, her tone icy, "the child is speaking voluntarily to the therapy dog. Ms. Morrison has not led the witness. Your objection is overruled." Elmore's jaw clenched, but he remained standing. "Your Honor, I must protest. This testimony is being given by a competent witness," Judge Holloway interrupted. "A witness who has been sworn in and who is answering questions to the best of her ability. Now sit down, counselor, or I will hold you in contempt." Elmore sat, but his expression was thunderous. Beside him, the defendant had gone completely still. His face, which had maintained a mask of calm indifference throughout the trial, had drained of all color. His hands, resting on the table before him, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. Rachel Morrison took a slow breath, forcing herself to remain calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was the moment she had been working toward for 6 months, the moment when justice became possible. But she had to be careful. She had to get this right. "Lily," she said gently, drawing the child's attention back to her, "thank you for being so brave. Shadow is very proud of you." At the mention of Shadow, Lily finally lowered her pointing finger and turned back to the dog. She wrapped both arms around his neck, seeking comfort after the enormous emotional effort of her accusation. Shadow remained solid and steady, his breathing calm and regular, a metronome of safety in the storm. "Can you tell Shadow how you know that man?" Rachel asked, keeping her voice soft and non-threatening. Lily was quiet for a moment, her face pressed against Shadow's fur. When she spoke, her voice was muffled but audible. "He used to come to our house. Mommy said he was her friend, but he wasn't nice." "How do you know he wasn't nice?" "He yelled a lot," Lily said, her small body beginning to shake again. "He made Mommy cry sometimes. One time I saw a bruise on Mommy's arm and she said she fell, but I don't think she fell. I think he pushed her." Margaret Chen, still standing near the back of the courtroom, pressed both hands over her mouth to stifle a sob. This was information that hadn't been in any of the police reports. This was new testimony, emerging only because Lily finally felt safe enough to speak. In the jury box, the 12 men and women were completely transfixed. Juror number 3, a construction worker with 3 daughters of his own, had his hands balled into fists. Juror number 8, a retired teacher, was openly crying. They were supposed to be impartial, objective, but they were also human beings listening to a 3-year-old describe witnessing her mother's murder. "Lily," Rachel continued carefully, "on the night when the table broke, when your mommy told you to run, do you remember what happened before that?" Lily nodded against Shadow's fur. They were fighting, really loud fighting. Mommy was trying to make him leave. She kept saying, get out, but he wouldn't go. He grabbed her arm. I saw it from the hallway." "What did you do when you saw him grab her?" "I ran to my room," Lily whispered. "Mommy always told me if grown-ups are fighting, I should go to my room, so I did. I went to my little table with my crayons. I was going to draw a picture to make Mommy happy later." The innocence of that statement, a child thinking she could fix her mother's pain with a crayon drawing, was devastating. Several people in the gallery wiped their eyes. Even Judge Holloway had to clear her throat, a rare crack in her judicial composure. "But then the loud got louder," Lily continued, her voice rising slightly with remembered fear. "And I heard the big crash. My whole room shaked. I was so scared, Shadow, so scared." Officer Janet Wright noticed that Shadow had begun exhibiting what trainers called deep pressure therapy. He was leaning his considerable weight against Lily, providing physical grounding for her emotional distress. It was something he did instinctively, without command, reading her needs and responding perfectly. That's when Mommy yelled for me to run, Lily said. But I couldn't. My legs were like jelly, so I crawled under my table and made myself really small, and I waited. What were you waiting for, Lily? For it to be over, she said simply. For the yelling to stop, for everything to be quiet again. Rachel glanced at her notes, then at Judge Holloway, who gave her a small nod to continue. Lily, after everything went quiet, you said you peeked out from under your table. Can you tell Shadow what you saw? Lily's entire body tensed. Her fingers gripped Shadow's fur so tightly that her knuckles went white. The dog didn't flinch or pull away. He simply pressed closer, offering silent support. I saw Mommy, Lily whispered, and her voice broke completely. She was on the floor by the big table, the one in the dining room. It was broken, and she was so still, Shadow. She wasn't breathing. She always breathed really loud when she was scared, but this time there was no breathing. Tears streamed down Lily's face, dripping onto Shadow's fur. And there was red, so much red, all around her, on the floor, on the broken table, on the walls. The clinical term was blood spatter, Rachel knew. The crime scene photos had shown extensive blood evidence throughout the dining room, but hearing it described through the eyes of a 3-year-old made it infinitely more horrific. And he was there, Lily continued, her voice gaining strength through her tears. Standing over her, looking at his hands. They had red on them too. He was breathing really hard, and he was saying bad words, over and over and over. She pulled back from Shadow just enough to look at the dog's face. I was so quiet, Shadow. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I was like a statue, because I was afraid if he heard me, he would make me stop moving too. The defendant had begun shaking his head slowly, his lips moving soundlessly. Whether he was denying the accusations or simply unable to process what was happening, no one could tell. How long did you stay hidden, Lily? Rachel asked gently. Forever, Lily said, and the word carried such weight that it felt literally true. Until I heard sirens. Then he ran away. He ran out the door really fast, and I heard his car. Vroom, really loud. And then the police came and they found me under my table, and I still couldn't talk because my voice was stuck inside. She looked up at Rachel for the first time, her tear-stained face filled with a desperate need for understanding. My voice was stuck for so long, Shadow, but you made it come unstuck. You made me brave enough to tell. Shadow, as if he understood the magnitude of what had just happened, gave Lily's face a gentle lick, a gesture of pure affection and approval. And in that moment, everyone in Courtroom 7 knew that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. A child reclaiming her voice, a truth finally told, and justice taking its first real breath. The following morning, Lily returned to the courtroom, but something was different. Margaret carried a small pink backpack that Lily clutched protectively. Inside were 24 crayons, the big, chunky kind made for small hands, and a stack of white paper. Dr. Patricia Chen, a child psychologist who had been working with Lily, had suggested this approach after yesterday's breakthrough. She's processing trauma, Dr. Chen had explained to Rachel the night before. Sometimes children can express through art what they can't articulate verbally. Let her draw. Let Shadow be there. See what emerges. Now, as Lily settled onto a cushion beside Shadow on the courtroom floor, she pulled out her crayons with the solemnity of a surgeon preparing instruments. The jury watched, fascinated and heartbroken, as this tiny girl organized her colors, reds separate from blues, yellows away from blacks. Judge Holloway had cleared a space near the witness stand, creating an impromptu art station. It was unprecedented, unconventional, and possibly grounds for appeal. But the judge had seen the previous day's testimony. She knew that traditional courtroom procedures weren't going to unlock the full truth from this traumatized child. Lily, Rachel said softly, kneeling nearby, can you draw a picture for Shadow? Maybe you can show him your house. Lily selected a brown crayon and began to draw. Her small hand moved with surprising confidence, creating a simple rectangle with a triangle on top. the universal child's version of a house. She added windows, a door, and a small tree beside it. Nothing remarkable, nothing disturbing. But then she reached for the black crayon. Shadow lay beside her, his head resting on his paws, watching with those patient brown eyes. Occasionally, Lily would pause in her drawing to stroke his fur, as if recharging her courage from his steady presence. The black crayon moved across the paper, adding dark scribbles to the windows. Angry, chaotic marks that transformed the cheerful house into something ominous. She pressed so hard that the crayon broke, but she simply picked up the broken piece and continued, grinding it into the paper with fierce intensity. Margaret, watching from her seat, felt her heart crack. She recognized this pattern. Lily had done similar drawings in therapy, but never with such detail, never with such clear purpose. "What are these black marks, Lily?" Rachel asked gently, pointing to the scribbled windows. "That's the loud," Lily said matter-of-factly, not looking up from her drawing. "The yelling. It was so loud it made the windows shake. See," she tapped the black scribbles. "Shake, shake, shake." She set that picture aside and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. This time, she chose red first, always a concerning choice when a child has witnessed violence. The red crayon created a large circle in the center of the page, then more red, and more. Lily colored with such intensity that her small hand began to tremble. Shadow, sensing her distress, lifted his head and gently nuzzled her arm. She paused, took a breath, and continued. Around the red circle she drew a brown rectangle. "That's the table," she explained to Shadow as if the dog had asked. "The big dining table. It broke right here." She drew jagged lines across the rectangle. Crack like thunder. Then she drew stick figures. The first was larger and adult. "That's Mommy," Lily whispered. The stick figure was lying down, surrounded by the red circle. She's sleeping, but not the good sleep, the forever sleep. Several jurors wiped their eyes. Juror number 5, a young mother, had to look away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Lily drew another stick figure, this one standing upright. She made it much bigger than the others, looming over the scene. And she colored it entirely in black, pressing so hard that the crayon left indentations in the paper. "That's the bad man," she said, her voice flat and emotionless, the tone of a child who had dissociated from her trauma to survive it. "His hands are red too. See." She drew exaggerated red hands on the black figure. Rachel felt her stomach twist. The medical examiner's report had confirmed that the defendant's hands had tested positive for the victim's blood. But hearing it was one thing. Seeing it through a 3-year-old's crayon drawing was something else entirely. Raw, unfiltered truth. "Can you draw where you were, Lily?" Rachel asked. Lily selected a yellow crayon, her favorite color, Margaret had noted sadly, though she used it less and less these days. She drew a small stick figure in the corner of the page, barely visible. She drew a small table over it, and then colored the entire space beneath the table in dark purple. "That's me," she said, pointing to the barely visible yellow figure. "Hiding in my purple dark, that's what I called it, my purple dark where I went to be invisible." She drew tears on the small yellow figure. Huge tears, disproportionate to the face, falling like rain. Dr. Patricia Chen, sitting in the gallery as an expert witness, made notes on her legal pad. These drawings were clinically significant. They showed spatial awareness, memory retention, and emotional processing. They corroborated Lily's verbal testimony in ways that were difficult to fabricate or imagine. Over the next hour, Lily produced 7 more drawings. Each one revealed another fragment of that terrible night. A picture of the door with a black figure running through it. When he left, vroom, vroom in his car. A drawing of flashing lights, red and blue scribbles that covered the entire page. The police cars, so many lights, they hurt my eyes but they meant help was coming. A picture of a police officer kneeling down and a small yellow figure still under the purple table. She tried to make me come out but I couldn't move. I was stuck. Then Lily created a drawing that made the entire courtroom fall silent. It showed her small yellow figure still under the table, but this time there was another figure beside her. A large dog colored in with brown and black. The dog had a speech bubble coming from its mouth. "I'm coming for you. Wait for me." Rachel frowned, confused. "Lily, honey, Shadow wasn't there that night, remember? You just met him yesterday." Lily looked up, her eyes wide and earnest. "I know, but that night when I was so scared, I wished really, really hard for someone to save me. Someone brave and strong who wouldn't let the bad man come back. I wished for a dog like Shadow. I called for him in my head. I said, 'Please, Shadow, please come help me.'" She returned to the drawing, adding a cape to the dog figure. "He didn't come that night because he didn't know I needed him yet, but he came now. He came when I was still scared, just in a different way. Shadow heard me, even though it took a long time." Officer Janet Wright felt tears prick her eyes. This child had created an imaginary protector to survive her trauma, and had named him Shadow before she ever knew a real dog by that name would enter her life. The final drawing Lily produced was different from all the others. She used bright colors, yellows, blues, pinks, greens. She drew herself, still a small yellow stick figure, standing upright this time, not hiding. Beside her stood Shadow, massive and brown, with that same cape flowing behind him. At the bottom of the page, in shaky letters that clearly took enormous effort, Lily had written, "Shadow is not scared." She held up the drawing to show the dog. "See, Shadow, you're not scared of anything, not the bad man, not the loud, not the red. You're the bravest." Shadow's tail gave a gentle thump against the floor. "And you know what?" Lily said, her voice stronger than it had been since the trial began. She looked directly at Rachel, then at the jury, making eye contact for the first time. "If Shadow's not scared, then I don't have to be scared either. He showed me how to be brave." She gathered all her drawings carefully, organizing them into a stack. "These are for the judge," she announced, "so she can see what happened, because sometimes pictures show things that words can't say." Rachel accepted the drawings with trembling hands, knowing that these crayon images, created by a traumatized child and witnessed by a therapy dog, had just built an unshakable foundation for the prosecution's case. Justice, it seemed, could be drawn in crayon. James Elmore stood before the jury, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his expression carefully crafted to convey reasonable skepticism. He had built a 30-year career on his ability to create doubt, to find the cracks in even the most compelling testimony. But today, facing a 3-year-old girl and her therapy dog, he felt those skills slipping through his fingers like sand. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and professional, "I'd like to cross-examine the witness." Judge Holloway looked down at Lily, who was still sitting beside Shadow, surrounded by her crayon drawings. The child looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her small body leaning heavily against the dog for support. "Keep it brief, Mr. Elmore," the judge warned. "And I remind you that this witness is 3 years old. Adjust your approach accordingly." Elmore nodded, approaching Lily with what he hoped was a gentle, non-threatening demeanor. Shadow's ears immediately perked up, his body language shifting subtly. The dog wasn't growling or showing aggression. He was far too well trained for that. But his attention was now completely focused on the approaching attorney, assessing potential threat. "Hello, Lily," Elmore said, forcing a smile. "My name is Mr. Elmore." Lily pressed closer to Shadow, saying nothing. "Lily, you've told us that you saw something very scary, but you were hiding under a table, weren't you?" Lily nodded slowly, her fingers twisting in Shadow's fur. "So you couldn't really see everything clearly, could you? It was dark, you were scared, things were confusing." "Objection," Rachel called out. "Counsel is leading the witness and making statements rather than asking questions." "Sustained," Judge Holloway agreed. "Mr. Elmore, ask questions, don't testify." Elmore adjusted his approach. Lily, was it dark under the table? A little bit, Lily admitted quietly. But I could see. The hall light was on. Mommy always left it on for me. Elmore seized on this. But you were very scared, weren't you? When people are scared, sometimes they remember things wrong. Sometimes they think they saw something that didn't really happen. I know what I saw. Lily's voice suddenly rang out, stronger than before. She sat up straighter, her hand firmly on Shadow's back. I saw him, the bad man. He was standing over Mommy and his hands were red and he was saying bad words and then he ran away. The outburst startled everyone, including Elmore. This wasn't the fragile, easily confused child he had expected to unravel on cross-examination. This was a little girl who had found her voice and was determined to use it. Lily, he tried again, isn't it possible that you saw someone else? Someone who came to help your mommy? Lily looked at Shadow as if seeking confirmation that she should answer. The dog remained calm and steady. She turned back to Elmore, her young face showing a wisdom beyond her years. Shadow knows when people are lying, she said simply. Dogs can tell, and I'm not lying, it was him. She pointed at the defendant again. I saw his face, he looked at me too. This was new information. Elmore felt his confidence waver. He saw you. For just a second, Lily said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Right before he ran away. He looked right at my table and our eyes met and I thought he was going to come get me too. But then the sirens got loud and he ran out the door. Rachel Morrison had goosebumps. This detail hadn't come out in any previous statement. The defendant had known Lily was there. He had seen her and left her alive, perhaps calculating that a 3-year-old witness wouldn't be believed, or wouldn't remember, or wouldn't be able to testify. He had miscalculated. Elmore changed tactics. Lily, do you know what the truth is? Yes. Do you know the difference between the truth and a story? Lily nodded vigorously. Truth is real. Stories are make-believe. This is truth. I wish it was make-believe, but it's not. The simplicity and sincerity of her answer was devastating. Several jury members were openly emotional now. Elmore tried one more approach. Lily, has anyone told you what to say today? Has Ms. Morrison or anyone else taught you what to tell us? Lily shook her head. Nobody told me. Shadow helped me remember and be brave, but these are my words, my truth. Elmore had nothing left. He glanced at his client, whose face had gone ashen, then back at the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. As he returned to his seat, Rachel stood to redirect. Lily, you've been so brave today. Just one more thing, in all your drawings you used red for blood. Why red? Because that's what color it was, Lily said matter-of-factly. Really, really red. Brighter than my red crayon. I tried to make it the right color, but crayons don't have blood red. Rachel presented the crime scene photos to the jury, carefully redacted to remove the most graphic elements, but still showing the extensive blood evidence throughout the dining room. The color was unmistakable, bright, arterial red. Then came the physical evidence that sealed the defendant's fate. Detective Sarah Williams took the stand, presenting the forensic findings. The defendant's fingerprints were on the broken table. His DNA was under the victim's fingernails, evidence of a struggle. His shoes, found in his car during the arrest, had tested positive for blood spatter matching the victim's type. And the defendant's alibi, Rachel asked. He claimed he was at a bar 30 miles away, Detective Williams testified. But we checked security footage. He wasn't there. His credit card shows no transactions that evening. His cell phone pinged off towers near the victim's residence at the time of death. The defendant's carefully constructed story was falling apart, brick by brick. Dr. Marcus Reed, the medical examiner, testified about the nature of the injuries. The victim suffered blunt force trauma consistent with being slammed against a table with significant force. The table's edge left distinctive contusions. Time of death was between 8:15 and 8:45 p.m. "And what time did the defendant claim he left the victim's house?" Rachel asked. "He said 7:00 p.m., said everything was fine when he left." "But the evidence suggests otherwise." "The evidence suggests he was there when she died. The blood spatter on his clothing, which he tried to wash but forensics still detected, came from high-velocity impact. That only happens when someone is present at the moment of injury." Rachel turned to the jury. "The defendant wants you to believe that a 3-year-old child imagined this crime, that her drawings are fantasy, that her testimony is confused or coached. But the physical evidence tells the same story Lily told. The blood, the broken table, the timeline, the defendant's presence at the scene, it all corroborates exactly what that little girl witnessed." She gestured toward Lily, who was dozing against Shadow now, exhausted from her emotional ordeal. "Lily didn't imagine this. She lived it. She survived it. And with Shadow's help, she found the courage to tell us the truth." The defense had crumbled. No amount of legal maneuvering could overcome the combination of Lily's heartbreaking testimony, her detailed drawings, and the mountain of physical evidence supporting every word she'd said. James Elmore stood for his closing argument, but his heart wasn't in it. He went through the motions: reasonable doubt, burden of proof, circumstantial evidence, but even he could hear how hollow it sounded. The truth was simple. A 3-year-old girl and a therapy dog had accomplished what seemed impossible. They had given voice to the voiceless. They had brought justice to the dead. And they had proven that sometimes the most powerful testimony comes from the smallest witnesses. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 42 minutes. To Rachel Morrison, sitting at the prosecution table reviewing her notes for the 100th time, it felt like 3 lifetimes. She knew the case was strong, overwhelming, even, but juries were unpredictable. She had seen slam-dunk cases fall apart and weak cases result in convictions. Nothing was certain until the verdict was read. In the victim advocacy room down the hall, Lily sat on the floor with Shadow, coloring a picture that had nothing to do with trauma or violence. She was drawing a garden full of flowers: pink roses, yellow sunflowers, purple tulips, and in the center stood a large brown dog wearing a superhero cape. Margaret Chen watched from a nearby chair, her hands folded in prayer, though she wasn't sure who or what she was praying to. Just please, she thought, please let this child see justice done. Officer Janet Wright sat beside Shadow, one hand resting on his shoulders. The dog had been working intensively for 3 days, absorbing Lily's fear and pain, providing constant comfort and stability. Even the best therapy dogs needed breaks, needed time to decompress from the emotional weight they carried. But Shadow seemed to understand that his job wasn't finished yet. He remained alert, attentive, ready. Judge Holloway was in her chambers when the bailiff knocked. "Your Honor, the jury has reached a verdict." Her heart quickened. She had presided over thousands of cases, but some stayed with you. This would be one of them. She stood, smoothed her robe, and prepared to see justice, or its failure, delivered. The courtroom filled quickly. Word had spread through the courthouse that a verdict was imminent. Reporters rushed back to their seats. Social workers and victim advocates gathered in the gallery. Detective Sarah Williams stood against the back wall, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. She had worked this case from the beginning, had been the first to arrive at the scene, had found Lily hiding under that table, catatonic with shock. The defendant was brought in, his expression carefully neutral but his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the table. James Elmore sat beside him, already composing the appeal in his mind. The case had been unprecedented: a 3-year-old witness, a therapy dog in the courtroom, crayon drawings admitted as evidence. Surely there were grounds for reversal. But when he looked at the jury filing back into the box, his stomach sank. Not one of them looked at the defendant. Trial lawyers knew that rule. If the jury won't make eye contact with your client, you've lost. Rachel had asked Lily if she wanted to be present for the verdict. The little girl had thought about it seriously, her face scrunched in concentration, then shook her head. "I told my truth," she had said simply. "Shadow and I did our job. Now the grown-ups do theirs." But when Rachel offered to text Margaret when the verdict came in, Lily had surprised her. "Can Shadow come tell me? In person. I want to hear it from him." So it was arranged. Judge Holloway entered and everyone rose. When she sat, she looked directly at the jury foreman, a middle-aged man who taught high school mathematics. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please hand the verdict form to the bailiff." The room held its collective breath as the paper changed hands. As Judge Holloway opened it, read it without expression, and handed it back. "Will the defendant please rise?" The defendant stood, his lawyer beside him. For the first time since the trial began, the defendant's mask cracked. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. "Mr. Foreman, please read the verdict." The foreman cleared his throat. His hands shook slightly as he held the paper. "In the case of the People versus Marcus Chen, on the charge of murder in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. People gasped, some cried out, others burst into tears. Detective Williams closed her eyes and exhaled deeply, the weight of 6 months of investigation finally lifting from her shoulders. Rachel Morrison felt her knees weaken, and she gripped the table for support. In all her years as a prosecutor, she had never felt relief this profound. The defendant's face crumbled. His legs buckled and he collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Judge Holloway gavelled for order. "The court thanks the jury for their service in this difficult case. The defendant is remanded into custody pending sentencing, which will occur in 30 days. As the bailiffs approached to take him away, the defendant suddenly looked up, his eyes wild. "She was 3 years old," he shouted. "A 3-year-old. How can you convict based on a 3-year-old's testimony?" Judge Holloway's expression was ice. "The jury can and did convict because that 3-year-old told the truth. A truth corroborated by physical evidence, forensic analysis, and your own contradictory statements. Remove him from my courtroom." As the defendant was led away, still protesting, Rachel gathered her papers with shaking hands. She had done it. Lily had done it. Shadow had done it. Justice had been served. Down the hall, Officer Wright checked her phone and saw Rachel's text, "Guilty, all counts." She looked at Shadow and nodded. The dog immediately stood, understanding that he had one more task to complete. They walked to the victim advocacy room. Margaret opened the door, her face streaked with tears but smiling. Lily looked up from her drawing, her crayon pausing mid-stroke. "Shadow," she said, reading something in the dog's demeanor. "Is it done? Did the grown-ups do their job?" Shadow walked directly to Lily and sat before her. Then he did something he had never done in court, something that was technically against protocol but absolutely necessary in this moment. He offered her his paw. Lily took it in both her small hands and somehow she understood. "They said guilty, didn't they? The bad man has to go away." Shadow's tail wagged, just once but definitively. Lily threw her arms around the dog's neck, and for the first time since her mother's death, she cried tears that weren't from fear or trauma but from relief. "We did it, Shadow," she sobbed into his fur. "Mommy can rest now. The bad man can't hurt anyone else." Margaret knelt beside them, wrapping both the child and the dog in her embrace. "You were so brave, sweetheart, so incredibly brave." "Shadow was brave first," Lily said, pulling back to look at the dog. "He showed me how." Later that evening, after the reporters had gotten their statements, after the legal teams had packed up their files, after the courtroom had emptied and the lights had dimmed, Rachel Morrison sat alone at the prosecution table. She pulled out the stack of Lily's drawings, which would now become permanent evidence in a solved case. She looked at each one, the violence, the trauma, the fear, but also the hope. That final drawing of Lily and Shadow standing together, brave and unafraid. On an impulse, she pulled out her phone and texted Officer Wright. "Tell Shadow thank you, from all of us. He didn't just help a little girl testify, he restored our faith in justice." The response came quickly, "He knows, and he says the pleasure was all his." "Okay, I'm paraphrasing. He actually just wagged his tail and stole my sandwich, but I think that's dog for your welcome." Rachel laughed, a real genuine laugh that released months of tension. The courtroom bell chimed 6 times, marking the end of the day. Somewhere in the city, a little girl was having dinner with her foster family, probably telling them every detail about her superhero dog. Somewhere, a killer was beginning his first night of many behind bars. And somewhere, a therapy dog was curling up on his bed, his work complete, his purpose fulfilled. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been delivered on 4 paws, wrapped in unconditional love, and spoken in the voice of a child who refused to let darkness win. The truth had set them all free. 6 months after the verdict, Lily ran through Memorial Park, her pink sneakers kicking up autumn leaves in brilliant sprays of red and gold. Her laughter rang out across the playground, pure, unself-conscious, the sound of a child reclaiming her childhood. Behind her, maintaining a steady pace, walked Shadow. He was off duty today, wearing a regular collar instead of his blue therapy vest, but he remained vigilant. Not because he sensed danger, but because protecting Lily had become second nature to him. Margaret Chen sat on a nearby bench, watching the scene with tears of joy in her eyes. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined this. The silent, traumatized child who had come into her foster care had transformed into this vibrant little girl who now attended preschool, made friends, and spoke in complete, enthusiastic sentences about everything from caterpillars to constellation patterns. The nightmare still came sometimes. There were still hard days when Lily would wake up crying, when shadows in corners looked too much like threatening figures, when loud noises sent her scrambling for safety. But those days were becoming fewer. The therapy was working. The love was working. And Shadow's regular visits were working miracles. "Margaret, watch this," Lily called out, climbing to the top of the slide. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have had the confidence to climb anything, wouldn't have trusted that the world was safe enough for such adventures. Now she sat at the top, grinning widely. "Shadow, are you watching?" The dog's tail wagged in confirmation. Lily slid down with a squeal of delight, landing at the bottom in a heap of giggles. Shadow immediately approached, checking her over with his nose, making sure she was okay. Lily threw her arms around his neck. "I'm fine, silly. That was fun." Officer Janet Wright approached, carrying 2 coffee cups. She handed one to Margaret and sat down beside her. "She's doing remarkably well." "Because of him," Margaret said, nodding toward Shadow. "I don't know how to thank you. The visits mean everything to her." "Shadow loves coming here," Janet said, smiling as she watched her dog play gently with Lily. "You know, the department has received over 50 requests for therapy dogs since Lily's case. Other police departments, prosecutors' offices, even hospitals and schools. Everyone wants their own Shadow." Margaret shook her head in wonder. One little girl and one dog changed everything. They really did. The impact of Lily's testimony had rippled far beyond Courtroom 7. The case had made national news, not as a sensational crime story, but as a testament to the power of therapy animals in the justice system. Law schools were teaching it. Victim advocacy programs were citing it. And most importantly, legislators were paying attention. 3 states had already passed bills mandating that courtroom therapy dogs be made available to child witnesses in trauma cases. Funding had been allocated. Training programs had been established. Organizations like Canine Companions for Independence were receiving unprecedented applications from law enforcement agencies across the country. Shadow had become something of a celebrity, though he remained wonderfully oblivious to his fame. He was featured in training videos, profiled in professional journals, and invited to speak at conferences. Or rather, Janet was invited to speak while Shadow demonstrated his skills. But his favorite work remained the same, spending time with Lily. "Shadow," Lily called out, running over with something clutched in her fist. "Look what I found." She opened her hand to reveal a bright yellow dandelion, slightly crushed but still cheerful. "It's the same color as me in my drawings. Remember, I was the yellow one." Shadow sniffed the flower politely, his tail wagging. Lily tucked the dandelion behind Shadow's ear, giggling when it immediately fell out. "You're too wiggly for flowers," she declared. Then her expression grew serious. "Shadow, can I tell you something?" The dog sat, giving her his full attention. "I'm not scared anymore," Lily said softly. "Well, sometimes I am, but not like before. Before I was scared all the time. Now I'm only scared of normal things like the dark or thunderstorms, and Margaret says those are okay things to be scared of." She knelt down, eye level with the dog. "You know what I remember most? Not the bad stuff. I mean, I remember it, but it doesn't make me want to hide anymore. I remember you. I remember feeling brave for the first time. I remember that when I talked to you, the words came out and they were the right words and everyone listened." Shadow licked her cheek gently. "I'm going to be like you when I grow up," Lily announced. "I'm going to help people who are scared. Maybe I'll be a police officer with a dog, or a doctor with a dog, or maybe just a person with a really good dog who makes people feel safe." Margaret and Janet exchanged glances, both fighting tears. Lily stood up and threw her arms wide. "I'm going to go swing now. Come on, Shadow." She raced toward the swings, and Shadow trotted after her, his movements relaxed and happy. "She's going to be okay," Janet said softly. "More than okay, she's going to be extraordinary." "She already is," Margaret replied. At the swings, Lily pumped her legs, gaining height, her hair flying behind her. "Look, Shadow, I'm flying. I'm brave like you." And she was. The little girl who had hidden under a table, who had lost her voice to trauma, who had witnessed the unthinkable, she was flying now. Not away from her past, but beyond it. The scars would always be there, but they no longer defined her. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lily finally wound down. She climbed off the swing and flopped onto the grass beside Shadow, both of them breathing hard from play. "Shadow," she said, staring up at the clouds, "do you think Mommy can see me? From heaven?" Shadow rested his head on her stomach, his presence reassuring. "I think she can," Lily decided. "And I think she's happy that I'm not hiding anymore. I think she's happy that I told the truth and the bad man went away. And I think she sent you to me because she knew I needed a hero." She rolled onto her side and cuddled against Shadow's warm fur. "You're the best hero ever, even better than the ones in movies because you're real, and you're mine." Margaret approached quietly. "Time to go home, sweetheart. Shadow needs his dinner and so do you." Lily stood reluctantly, brushing grass from her clothes. She gave Shadow one more enormous hug. "Will you come back soon?" Shadow's tail wagged his promise. "Okay, I love you, Shadow. Thank you for making me brave." As they walked to their separate cars, Lily held Margaret's hand and chattered about her day. The slide, the swings, the dandelion, everything a 4-year-old finds magical about an afternoon in the park. Janet loaded Shadow into her vehicle, pausing to scratch behind his ears. "You know you're a hero, right? Not just to Lily, to all of us." Shadow's response was to yawn widely and settle into his bed in the back seat, ready for a well-deserved nap. Across the parking lot, Lily called out one more time. "Bye, Shadow. See you soon. Keep being brave." Shadow's tail thumped against his bed, his way of saying goodbye, his way of saying he'd always be there when she needed him. Because some bonds transcend language. Some heroes have 4 paws and fur. And sometimes, justice arrives not with a gavel but with a gentle nuzzle and an unwavering presence. Lily was no longer the silent witness hiding in darkness. She was a survivor, a voice for the voiceless, and a testament to the healing power of unconditional love. She was whole, she was safe, she was free. And somewhere, a therapy dog with kind brown eyes dreamed of dandelions and laughter, knowing that his work, though never truly finished, had changed the world. One little girl at a time. The end.